The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles hung thick in the Monroe dining room, mixing with the low hum of football commentary coming from the living room. My fork hovered midair, a perfect bite of stuffing and gravy balanced at the tip, when my mother leaned across the table and whispered, "You owe us everything, Rachel. Don't forget who paid for your life." Her words slid into my ear like cold air under a closed door. I froze, the warmth of the room suddenly unbearable. Around me, the conversation continued unbroken, the polite clatter of silverware, my father's booming laugh as he recounted one of his tired hunting stories, the way my younger brother Ethan nodded along his gold watch catching the light. Nobody noticed the way my face drained of color, or maybe they did and chose to look away. I swallowed hard, forcing the bite down, tasting nothing but salt and shame. Thanksgiving had always been performative in our family, a carefully rehearsed play of gratitude masking years of imbalance. I glanced toward the head of the table where my father, George Monroe, 68, carved the turkey with exaggerated authority, as if the knife were a royal scepter. To his right, my mother, Denise, 63, smiled tightly, her pearls gleaming under the chandelier I had paid to replace after it short-circuited last year. Across from me, Ethan raised his glass, toasting his recent promotion, a position I'd helped him prepare for by rewriting his resume and coaching him through interviews. To family, he said, grinning. My father clapped him on the back. To our success. No one toasted me, though I had spent the past year covering Mom's medical bills, Dad's car repairs, and the mortgage payment that kept this very roof from collapsing. I'd taken on extra consulting work to keep them afloat, telling myself it was temporary, that family meant sacrifice. Now, as my mother's words echoed, "You owe us everything," I realized she believed it literally. I caught her watching me, her expression a mix of satisfaction and warning, like a queen reminding her servant of her place. Ethan leaned back, smirking. "You okay, Rach?" "You look pale." I forced a smile. "Just a bit warm. That's what happens when you sit closest to the kitchen," my father said without looking at me, his tone half joking, half commanding, as though my role in the family hierarchy was to serve and stay quiet. The old clock in the living room chimed 6 times, the sound sharp and final. The same clock I'd paid to repair last month when Mom complained the ticking kept her awake. Now it kept time for my humiliation. I looked at each face around the table, cataloging the small betrayals, the way Dad only turned proud when Ethan spoke, the way Mom deferred to the men, the way Ethan's wife avoided eye contact, as if she feared catching my invisibility. I had come home believing I was holding this family together. Instead, I was their invisible scaffolding, expected to bear the weight while remaining unseen. As the laughter resumed, I reached for my wine glass, my hand steady even as my pulse thundered. I took a long sip, letting the bitterness anchor me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilt for wanting out. I felt clarity, cold and sharp. My mother's whisper had not broken me. It had named the truth I'd been too kind to speak. Across the table, Ethan lifted another slice of turkey onto his plate and said, "You really should be grateful, sis. Not everyone has a family like ours." I met his eyes, my voice quiet but certain. "You're right," I said. "Not everyone does." And as their laughter filled the room, I smiled back, already imagining what it would feel like when this would be the last Thanksgiving I'd ever spend here. I didn't sleep that night. The whisper wouldn't stop replaying, looping in my head like a bad song. "You owe us everything." It wasn't new, not really. It was the chorus of my entire life, hidden beneath every favor I'd done, every bill I'd paid. The first time I heard it, I was 28, and Mom had just been diagnosed with heart failure. I'd left my apartment in Philadelphia, packed up my things, and moved back to this creaking house in rural Pennsylvania to help. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd save enough to get her the best care, that family came first. For 2 years, I worked long hours at the financial firm in Pittsburgh, driving back and forth every weekend, signing checks for prescriptions, hospital stays, and home repairs. When the roof leaked, I called the contractor. When the power bill doubled, I paid it before the shutoff notice could arrive. When Dad's truck broke down, I handed him my card without hesitation. And when Ethan, the golden boy, needed help with his daughter's tuition, I transferred the funds quietly so he wouldn't feel embarrassed. "You've always been the responsible one," Dad would say, patting my shoulder like it was a compliment. Mom would nod. Your brother just has a different kind of stress, dear. Men have to provide for their families. I used to swallow that line easily like bitter medicine, convincing myself it was love disguised as expectation. But now, remembering Mom's whisper, I saw it for what it was, a hierarchy. I was the backup generator of this family, the one expected to keep everything running while the men claimed the credit. Ethan's wedding, his new house, Mom's endless medical treatments, all funded by me. Yet the gratitude never reached my name. I could still hear Dad at the dinner table months ago, bragging to his friends Denise and I have managed to support both kids through thick and thin. I'd been sitting there invisible, calculating the cost of his lie down to the cent. The night air outside my window was cold and sharp. I stared at the dark silhouette of the backyard shed where Dad kept his fishing gear, the one I'd paid to replace after a storm last year. My reflection in the glass looked older than 36. My eyes had the tired glaze of someone who'd traded too many dreams for stability. The unfairness should have made me angry. Instead, it hollowed me. Maybe that was worse. When Ethan called me Practical Rachel at family gatherings, everyone laughed as though practicality were a flaw that disqualified me from tenderness. I thought of all the nights I'd driven Mom to the hospital, holding her hand through lab results, paying for procedures that insurance wouldn't cover. She'd cried once, squeezing my fingers. I don't know what we'd do without you, but the gratitude never lasted. It morphed into dependency, then entitlement. Dad had started making offhand remarks. You're lucky to live here rent-free, as though I hadn't paid the mortgage in full for months. That night, I took out a folder from my briefcase, copies of every payment, every receipt neatly labeled. Electricity, water, internet, car insurance, health coverage. Over $38,000 in the past 2 years. I traced the ink of my own signature on each check. That was my sin. I'd made their comfort too easy. I'd trained them to believe survival was free, that love came with invoices they didn't have to see. My phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. Thanks for covering Mom's last appointment. I'll pay you back once the bonus hits. I stared at the text. The bonus never hit. It never had. I placed the phone face down, exhaled slowly, and whispered to the empty room. The debt was never mine. Outside, the wind rattled the old maple tree against my window, its branches clawing softly at the glass. It sounded almost like applause. A quiet acknowledgement that something inside me had finally shifted. Tomorrow, I'd drive to work, smile through meetings, and pretend nothing had changed. But it had. I was done mistaking obligation for love. I was done carrying a family that never once lifted me back. The whisper had been meant to put me in my place. Instead, it reminded me I had the power to walk away. By morning, the house smelled like coffee and denial. Mom was already in the kitchen humming softly as if the previous night's whisper had evaporated with the steam from the coffee maker. She handed me a mug, her tone syrupy sweet. You'll need this, dear. You've got a long drive ahead. I took it without answering. Across the counter, Dad sat at the breakfast table reading the local paper glasses perched low on his nose. Ethan had already stopped by before heading to work, leaving behind a box of donuts and his usual trail of self-congratulation. There was a note on top in his looping handwriting. For the best sister ever. Don't stress too much. I stared at it, feeling the irony sit heavy in my throat. I had paid for the coffee machine, the kitchen remodel, even the tile under my feet. But somehow in this house, gratitude was always a one-way street. Your brother works so hard, Mom said suddenly as if reading my thoughts. He's got a family to provide for, you know. I looked at her. So do I. You and Dad. She frowned as though I'd broken some invisible rule. That's different. You're single. You don't have the same burdens. The sentence landed harder than she realized. It wasn't just an observation. It was an accusation, proof that in her eyes my life had less value because it didn't orbit a man. You've always been the steady one, she added, softening her voice. You were born to help others. Ethan has bigger dreams. I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my chest. Bigger dreams. He worked as an assistant manager at an auto parts store. I managed financial portfolios worth millions, but in this family, my success didn't translate into status. Dad folded his newspaper, his tone clipped. Don't start, Rachel. We don't compare here. Family isn't a competition. That was his favorite line, one that always appeared right before I said something true. Of course, I said, stirring my coffee. We only compare when it benefits Ethan. His jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. The silence stretched between us, thick and familiar. It was the same silence that had followed every uncomfortable truth I'd ever spoken in this house. When I was a teenager and asked why Ethan got to go to private school while I stayed in public, Dad said boys need better opportunities. When I won a scholarship to college, Mom's only reaction was, "Now your brother can use the savings we put aside." The pattern had always been there. I'd just spent years pretending not to see it. "You should be proud of how your brother turned out," Mom said, setting a plate of eggs in front of me as though food could patch over resentment. "He's building a family. That's what matters." I met her eyes. "And what am I building?" She hesitated, then smiled the way people do when they don't want to answer. "You have us. Isn't that enough?" The words might have been meant as comfort, but they felt like chains. For decades, I'd mistaken their dependence for closeness, their control for care. They didn't want me to succeed. They wanted me available. The quiet realization burned like cold fire under my skin. "I should get going," I said, standing. Dad muttered without looking up. "Don't forget to send that utility payment. They're due next week." Mom reached for her purse. "Oh, and I'll need your insurance card for my checkup." I froze mid-step, then nodded slowly. "I'll handle it," I said, my voice steady. They both smiled satisfied, unaware that those would be the last promises I'd ever make under this roof. As I stepped outside, the morning air hit me sharp and cold. The sun lit the frost on the grass like shards of glass. Somewhere behind me, through the half-closed window, I heard Mom's voice again, muffled but clear enough. "She's such a good girl. She just doesn't know her place yet." And in that moment, I knew I was finally ready to learn what life looked like without earning their love. That evening, the remnants of the feast still cluttered the kitchen counters, half-eaten pies, gravy stains, empty wine glasses stacked by the sink. Mom lounged on the couch in her robe, scrolling through her phone, while Dad dozed off to the low hum of post-game analysis on TV. The house, heavy with leftovers and silence, felt smaller than it ever had. I stood at the sink washing plates, my sleeves rolled up, my mind moving in slow mechanical circles. Each scrape of the dish rag against porcelain seemed to erase one illusion at a time. Family, gratitude, love. They all blurred together into something transactional. Behind me, the football commentators cheered. Ethan's team must have scored. "Rachel, be a dear and bring your father some pie," Mom said without looking up. "He's been resting all day." I dried my hands, cut a slice, and carried it to the recliner. Dad accepted it with a grunt. "You make the best crust, kiddo, just like your mother used to." I almost laughed. The crust was store-bought. He'd never noticed the difference. "Thanks, Dad," I said softly, setting the plate down. The clock on the wall ticked toward 8. I still hadn't told them I planned to drive back to my apartment early the next morning. I needed distance space to think, to breathe. But the universe, as always, had its own timing. "Oh, before you leave tomorrow," Mom called from the couch, "transfer $800 to my card, will you? I need to get some Christmas shopping done before the sales end." I paused. "What for?" She finally looked up, her face serene, almost amused. "For your brother's kids, of course. You know how expensive gifts are these days." "And my own gifts?" I asked, half out of curiosity, half out of defiance. She smiled faintly. "Sweetheart, you don't need anything. You're independent." I turned off the faucet, wiped my hands on a towel, and faced her fully. "You still have savings from the money I sent last month." She frowned, feigning confusion. "That was for household expenses." "You know that." Her tone shifted soft on the surface, sharp underneath. "You owe it to your family, Rachel. You wouldn't let us go without, would you?" That word again. "Oh." The syllable hung between us like the scent of burned sugar, sweet, acrid, impossible to ignore. "Mom," I said slowly. When did helping turn into owing Dad stirred, half awake? "Don't start that tone," he grumbled. "Your mother's done enough worrying. You've been blessed, Rachel. Time you remember where you came from." "I remember perfectly," I said. My hands trembled, but my voice stayed level. "I remember when I was 28 and signed for your mortgage. I remember paying off Mom's surgery. I remember every bill in this house with my name on it. So, yes, I remember exactly where I came from. The room went still. Dad blinked, his mouth tightening. Mom's phone screen dimmed in her lap. Ethan, who had walked in mid-conversation, froze by the doorway holding his jacket. "Whoa," he said, half laughing. "What's all this? We're just asking for a little help. You always make things so dramatic." His wife appeared behind him, shifting uncomfortably. "Ethan," she whispered. "Let's not." "No," he cut her off. "She acts like she's some kind of martyr. Everything's about how much she's sacrificed." Newsflash. Rachel family means giving. I met his gaze. Does it also mean taking without asking? His jaw flexed, but he said nothing. Mom stood adjusting her robe. "Enough," she said sharply. "You're upsetting your father." Dad exhaled, nodding. "We'll talk about this when you've calmed down, Rachel." But I was calm, calmer than I'd ever been. I walked to the sideboard, picked up my car keys, and placed them in my pocket. "Don't bother," I said, heading for the stairs. The conversation's already over. Upstairs, as I packed a small overnight bag, the weight of their entitlement finally settled into clarity. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted an asset. And the cruelest part was how normal it had all begun, with love disguised as need and need disguised as gratitude. By the time I zipped the bag shut, I had decided something irreversible. Tomorrow, when I left this house, I wouldn't just be leaving for the weekend. I'd be leaving the role they'd written for me. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was still the kind of silence that sits heavy after a fight no one wants to acknowledge. I moved quietly, careful not to wake anyone, and started gathering a few documents from my desk. I needed my own proof, not for them, but for myself. Years of being gaslighted had blurred my sense of reality. I needed something tangible to hold on to. I opened the drawer where I kept receipts, bills, and bank statements, my private archive of every sacrifice they'd already forgotten. Each folder was labeled in neat handwriting, utilities, medical, mortgage, miscellaneous. But beneath the stack, something new caught my eye. A letter-sized envelope with my father's handwriting on the front. My stomach tightened. He never left anything personal in my space. I pulled it out carefully. Inside were several bank statements, all under the name George Monroe, drawn from an account I'd never seen before. The balance was over $18,000, climbing steadily each month. The deposits looked suspiciously familiar, amounts that matched the exact sums I'd transferred into my parents' joint account to pay their bills. My pulse quickened. He'd been funneling the money into his own hidden account. The room swayed slightly as I flipped through the pages, my breath catching at the sight of the latest transaction deposit. $6,000. Memo from R. Monroe account. I pressed my fingers to my temples, willing myself not to panic. The numbers didn't lie. My generosity had been weaponized against me. The irony of it stung like acid. While I'd been skipping dinners to stretch my budget, my father had been quietly building himself a rainy day fund. Beneath the statements was a glossy brochure from Lakeview Marine and Supply, a fishing boat catalog. The front cover featured a sleek white vessel named the Tranquility. Scrawled across the margin in Dad's blocky handwriting were words that made my blood run cold. Down payment $5,500. Delivery after Thanksgiving. I dropped the brochure on the floor, my hands trembling. Images flashed in my mind, the argument about money last night, Mom's voice demanding $800 for gifts. Dad's casual order to pay the utilities. They hadn't needed me for support. They'd needed me for convenience. The charity I'd extended out of love had become their loophole to luxury. I sat back on the bed, staring at the evidence spread before me like a crime scene. Rage came next, not the loud, explosive kind, but the quiet, corrosive type that burns steady and clean. I'd always thought control in this family belonged to my father, but I saw now it was Mom who managed the narrative. She'd used her illness as a leash, her fragility as a shield. Whenever I questioned anything, she'd clutch her chest and whisper, "Don't stress me, Rachel," and I'd fold every single time. The manipulation was so skillful it had felt like duty. But this was premeditated betrayal. I forced myself to breathe, to stay logical. That's what they'd always underestimated, my ability to think, not react. I opened my laptop and began comparing statements. Every family bill I'd paid in the last 3 months lined up perfectly with a matching deposit into Dad's secret account. They'd even waited until after I'd covered November's expenses before planning my exit. I found a small spiral notepad tucked between the folders. On the first page, written in Mom's handwriting, were a series of notes. Electric 14th. Internet 17th. Rachel. Paid. After bills, deposit to G's ACEE. She had been in on it. Both of them. The betrayal hit deeper than any insult ever could. It wasn't just financial, it was moral, maternal, spiritual. My mother had turned motherhood into accounting. A soft knock startled me. The door creaked open, and Ethan's daughter Lily peeked inside, clutching her stuffed bunny. Aunt Rachel Grandma says, "Can we use your card for groceries? Grandpa's out." My throat tightened. I smiled gently. "Not this time, sweetheart. Tell her Aunt Rachel's busy." When she left, I gathered the papers into a single folder and tucked it into my bag. The evidence wasn't just about money anymore. It was proof of my sanity, my reality. The house around me suddenly felt foreign, hostile, like a stage set built to contain me. I zipped up my coat and whispered to the empty room, "You planned this. You think you can erase me. But I have the receipts." The early light outside was pale and sharp, spilling across the frost-coated yard. The world beyond this house waited cold but clean. I closed the door behind me without looking back. By noon, I had driven back to the house with a folder of evidence tucked beneath my arm. The sky was dull gray, heavy with the promise of snow. When I stepped inside, Mom was at the kitchen table arranging coupons, pretending to be busy, while Dad sat with his reading glasses low on his nose, scrolling through his phone. They both looked up when they heard the door close. "Oh, good you're back," Mom said, her tone deceptively bright. The internet went down again. "Can you call the company?" I set the folder on the counter, letting the sound of the impact slice through the room. "No, Mom. I'm not calling anyone. We need to talk." The cheer drained from her face like color from old paint. "Talk about what?" I pulled out the first bank statement and slid it toward her. "About this." Her eyes darted over the numbers, confusion feigned so poorly it almost made me laugh. "What is this supposed to be?" "Your husband's secret account," I said quietly. "Funded by the money I transferred every month. Money that was supposed to pay your medical bills and the utilities. You've both been skimming off the top and saving it." Dad stiffened his jaw, tightening. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about." I opened the folder wider, revealing the brochure. The image of the white boat gleamed like mockery between us. Down payment $5,500, delivery after Thanksgiving. That's tomorrow, isn't it? Guess you couldn't wait until after I paid November's bills. The silence that followed was so thick it hummed. Then Dad leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "It's a family investment," he said slowly. "I worked for 40 years, Rachel. I'm entitled to enjoy my retirement." "With my money, with family money," he corrected, his voice rising. "You're part of this family, aren't you?" "Part of it, sure," I said, "but not enough to be respected, just enough to be used." Mom slammed her hand on the table. "That's enough. You're making something ugly out of love." "Love doesn't steal," I said, my voice steady now, calm in its precision. "Love doesn't lie. You planned this, both of you. You waited until I paid every bill, then decided I was the problem that needed to leave." Dad's chair screeched against the tile as he stood, his face flushed red. "You're out of line. We took you in when you couldn't afford your own rent. We've put up with your attitude and your interference for years." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "You took me in. This house would have been foreclosed 2 years ago if I hadn't stepped in." Mom rose too, her voice trembling but sharp. "You're twisting everything. We raised you, we clothed you, we gave you everything you have, and now I've paid it back 100 times over." I met her eyes unblinking. "We're even." The words landed like a gavel. She blinked rapidly, her lips trembling. "You wouldn't survive without family," she whispered. "You think those people you work with care about you? When things get bad, we're the only ones who'll still be here." "You mean, when things get bad for you," I said. "Because when they got bad for me, I handled it. Alone." For a long moment, none of us moved. The only sound was the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, I said, "I'm done." Dad stared at me stunned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I closed the folder, tucking it under my arm. "It means I understand perfectly." The phrase, the same one he used when he wanted to end a conversation, hung between us like a mirror. His brow furrowed, unsure how to respond to hearing his own words turned back at him. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "No," I said, turning toward the door. "You will." I stepped outside, the cold biting at my cheeks, my breath visible in the air. For the first time in years, the world felt wide open. Behind me, through the thin kitchen window, I saw their silhouettes frozen in silence. The storm hadn't erupted into shouting or broken plates. It was quieter than that, colder. The kind of silence that signals the end of something too damaged to repair. The next morning, I woke up in my apartment to a rare quiet. No calls, no texts, no demands. For the first time in years, my phone wasn't a leash. I poured myself coffee and opened my laptop. The folder I'd taken from my parents' house lay beside me like a sleeping weapon. I didn't need to use it yet. I just needed to make sure they couldn't use me anymore. I began methodically untangling my name from their lives. First, I logged into the utility portals, electric, water, gas, and canceled automatic payments. Then I called the credit union to remove my authorization from the joint emergency account I'd opened when Mom got sick. Miss Monroe, the representative, said politely, "Are you sure you want to close this link? It'll affect the other account holders." "That's the point," I said. My voice didn't even shake. I opened my banking app next and created a new account at a separate institution, one they didn't know about, and moved every cent of my savings there. I even transferred my direct deposit from work, setting new passwords, new security questions, new beginnings. Each step felt like cutting a thread from a web that had held me for years. I thought it would feel lonely. It didn't. It felt clean. By noon, the messages started coming. First, from Mom. "Your father and I noticed the bills didn't go through. Is there an issue with your card?" Then from Dad, less polite. "The electric company says the payment failed. You'd better fix this before the weekend." I didn't respond. The silence was the most radical act of my life. Around 3, my phone rang again. Mom, this time, her voice trembling in practiced fragility. "Rachel, honey, the internet's down and I can't reach your father. I think the router broke again." "Can you come over? Call the provider," I said evenly. "That's what I used to do. Rachel, please," she said, voice wobbling. "You know your father doesn't handle these things well. Then he'll have to learn." I ended the call before she could gather another sentence of guilt. 15 minutes later, a text arrived. "Your father says you're being cruel. He's done everything for you. Remember who raised you." I stared at the screen for a long moment, the words like smoke dissipating. Then I deleted the thread entirely. By evening, the house of cards started to tremble. The power company called to confirm that service was being transferred out of my name. The woman on the line sounded almost sympathetic when she said, "They'll need to set up their own account to keep service running." "I know," I said. "They'll manage." That night, Drew, my friend and colleague, stopped by with Thai food and a bottle of cheap red wine. "So," she said, plopping onto my couch, "how does it feel to finally commit financial murder?" I laughed, but it came out more like an exhale. "Strange. Like I just woke up from a long sleep." "About time," she said, raising her glass. "You've been their walking ATM for years." I hesitated. "I keep thinking about Tessa, sorry Ethan's daughter. She's just a kid. She doesn't know what's going on." Drew leaned back, studying me. "You can love them, Rachel, just not at the expense of yourself." That night, I slept better than I had in months, but the peace didn't last. The next morning, I woke to a string of missed calls, 5 voicemails, and 1 message from an unknown number. "If you don't fix what you've broken, we'll come to you." No name, but I didn't need one. The threat was as familiar as their handwriting. I forwarded the message to my work phone and took screenshots for record keeping. Then I typed a note to myself and saved it in a new folder labeled Documentation. Every betrayal, every dollar, every word they wanted to play this game in the dark. I would play it in daylight. Outside, snow had begun to fall, softly layering the street in white. I stood by the window, watching it cover everything evenly. No favoritism, no hierarchy, no debt. Just clean, quiet balance. For the first time, I felt the same way. By the third day, their silence cracked. It started with the doorbell. I opened the door to find Mom standing in the hallway of my apartment building, wrapped in her fur-lined coat, clutching her purse like it contained her last defense. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her lipstick was perfect. Behind her, the cold wind carried the smell of gasoline and anger. "Rachel," she said breathlessly, "we need to talk." I stepped aside, not because I wanted to, but because part of me was still trained to make space for her. She brushed past me and set her purse on the counter like she owned the place. "Your father is furious. The power's out, the internet's off, and they canceled my appointment because the insurance was declined. Do you understand what you've done?" I folded my arms. I stopped paying for adults who can pay for themselves. She stared at me, disbelief etched into every line of her face. "We're your parents, and I'm your daughter, not your provider." "Don't you dare take that tone with me," she snapped, her voice trembling. "We gave you everything. We sacrificed so you could go to college, get a good job, buy nice clothes. You owe us some respect." I laughed, quiet, bitter, unplanned. "You didn't pay for college, Mom. I did with scholarships and part-time jobs. You didn't pay my rent or my car or my life. I did. You've rewritten history so many times you believe it's true." She blinked rapidly as if trying to process a language she didn't understand. "You sound just like your father says ungrateful." "Ungrateful," I took a step closer. "You both used me. You lied about being broke while funneling money into a secret account. You planned to buy a boat while pretending to be helpless. And you still think I should thank you." She turned away, fumbling for a tissue. "You're overreacting. You're imagining things again." "You always—" I cut her off. "Stop. I have the receipts, Mom. I found everything." Her hand froze midair. For a heartbeat, the room went silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then her voice dropped to a whisper. "You shouldn't have looked through our things." The way she said it cold-measured made it clear she wasn't sorry for what they'd done, only for being caught. "I was right," I said softly. "You were never sick enough to need those extra payments, were you?" Her shoulders stiffened. "Don't twist this. I had every right to use my insurance for cosmetic fillers." I said the words, slicing through her sentence. "You lied about medical procedures. You lied about the bills, and you made me feel guilty for questioning it." The silence that followed wasn't denial, it was admission. Her mask faltered, revealing something hard beneath. "You wouldn't understand what it's like to be a woman my age, to feel yourself fading while your husband still gets attention. You wouldn't understand what it means to survive." "Survive," I repeated. "By exploiting your daughter." She turned sharply. "Don't you dare judge me. You don't have children. You don't know what it's like to give up your youth and dreams for family. You didn't give them up." "Mom," I said quietly, "you handed them to Ethan." That was the breaking point. She slapped the countertop, her face twisting. "You've always envied him. You can't stand that he's loved." I shook my head, the sting in my chest heavier than anger. "No, I can't stand that love in this house always meant hierarchy. That you taught me to earn affection while he got it for free." She picked up her purse, her movements jerky. "You'll regret this, Rachel. Family is forever. You can't cut blood ties." "Watch me," I said. She stopped at the door, turning halfway, her expression softening just enough to land one final blow. "You'll die alone," she whispered. "And when you do, no one will remember all the money you made." The door shut behind her with a quiet click that sounded like an ending. I stood there for a long time, surrounded by the hum of my apartment and the faint echo of her perfume. My hands trembled, not from fear this time, but release. They had broken every rule of love, and now, for the first time, I was rewriting the script. 2 days later, I received a call from a blocked number. I almost didn't answer until I heard Dad's voice low and tight with restrained fury. "You've gone too far, Rachel." I stayed silent, waiting. "Your mother's been crying for days. You think cutting us off makes you powerful? It makes you cruel, heartless." I took a slow breath. "What's cruel?" Dad is stealing from your own daughter and calling it love. You're delusional, he said sharply. You're making us sound like criminals. I have documentation, I said, keeping my tone even. Bank transfers the boat deposit mom's notes about the utility dates. Do you want me to send copies to the authorities, or shall I start with the IRS? The silence that followed was thick. Then came the sound of something shattering maybe his self-control. You ungrateful little, he began, but I ended the call. My hands were steady. By the afternoon, I was sitting across from Mara Lee, an attorney I'd met years ago through work. Her office smelled faintly of cedar and paper. She listened as I explained everything, her pen moving fast, her expression unreadable. When I finally ran out of words, she looked up. You've been supporting them financially for over 2 years, she said, and they've been diverting those funds for personal gain. Yes. She nodded slowly. That's fraud, Rachel, especially if they used your insurance for unauthorized medical procedures. The word fraud hung in the air, sharp and sterile. I'd used legal terms my whole career, but never as weapons against my own blood. I don't want to ruin them, I said quietly. I just want them to stop. Mara leaned back, eyes steady. You're not ruining them. You're protecting yourself. People like this, they count on your guilt more than your generosity. That night, I went home and drafted an email. No anger, no emotion, just facts. I listed every transfer, every bill, every receipt. I attached copies of the statements I'd found and ended the message with one line. Any further attempt to contact me for money or access my accounts will be considered harassment and reported to law enforcement. I hope you seek help. I will not fund it. Then I hit send. The response came faster than I expected. 10 minutes later, my phone lit up with a text from Dad. You'll regret this. We raised you, we can destroy you. I took a screenshot and filed it under evidence. The next day, Mara called. Rachel, I took the liberty of running a background check on your parents' new account. It's registered under your father's name, but the address belongs to a property you also paid for the lake house deed lists you as co-owner. My stomach dropped. That can't be right. It's right, she said gently. You've been paying taxes on it for 3 years. He must have added his name without your consent. You'll need to file a claim to regain full ownership. By the time I hung up, the quiet fury inside me had crystallized into something sharper resolve. I wasn't just their victim anymore. I was their creditor, their witness, their reckoning. I printed the property documents, organized them into binders, and highlighted every transaction that proved my ownership. For years, I'd treated money as a form of care. Now, it was evidence. The next morning, I walked into the county clerk's office and filed an affidavit to have the title transferred solely back to my name. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with warm eyes, looked up after stamping the papers. Family disputes can be the hardest, she said softly. I met her gaze. It's not a dispute, it's an audit. That evening, my phone buzzed again, this time from Ethan. His tone was colder than I'd ever heard it. Mom says you're taking legal action. Are you really suing our parents? I'm protecting my property. He laughed bitterly. You sound just like Dad when he talks about debt. Guess you finally learned something from him. Maybe I said, but I also learned how not to live a life built on lies. Keep the house. Keep your precious money, he snapped. But don't expect forgiveness when this all blows up. I hung up before answering, because deep down, I already knew this wasn't about forgiveness. It was about ending the pattern. The line had been drawn, and for once, I was the one holding the pen. The storm hit faster than I expected. By the next week, the story had spread through our extended family like smoke through old walls. Aunt Valerie called first, her voice tight with judgment. Your father said you're suing them over a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, I said evenly. It's theft. There was a pause, the sound of her disapproval like static over the line. Rachel family doesn't take family to court. Family doesn't steal either, I replied and hung up before she could lecture me. By Tuesday, the calls had multiplied. My uncle, 2 cousins, even my old pastor, each one carrying a version of the story my parents had crafted. In theirs, I was the ungrateful daughter who'd abandoned her aging parents out of greed. They had rewritten the truth so quickly it almost impressed me. I didn't respond. Every call went to voicemail, every message filed neatly into a folder marked Family Narrative. Then came the letter, handwritten, shaky cursive on yellow stationery. Rachel, you've always been dramatic, but this is cruel even for you. We didn't mean to hurt you. Your mother hasn't slept in days. She says her heart can't take this stress. Is that what you want? For her to collapse just so you can feel powerful? Call me. Let's be civil before the lawyers make things worse. Dad, I read it twice, my throat tight. The manipulation was almost poetic guilt wrapped neatly in concern, but the last line caught my eye before the lawyers make things worse. It wasn't a plea. It was a warning. I brought the letter to Mara the next morning. She scanned it and frowned. He's bluffing, but he's scared. That's progress. Scared of losing? I asked. Scared of losing control, she corrected. That evening, my building's security guard called up to tell me there was a disturbance in the parking lot. When I went down, Dad was there standing beside his truck, red-faced, his voice echoing off the concrete. You think you can take my property, he barked the moment he saw me. You think you can humiliate your family. Leave, Dad, I said quietly. He stepped closer, his breath sharp with anger. You don't talk to me like that. I built everything you have. You built a lie, I said, and I'm dismantling it. For a moment, I thought he might strike me. But then the building's security officer appeared beside us, calm but firm. Sir, you need to go. Now. Dad glared at him, then at me. You'll regret this, he said, voice trembling. When we're gone, you'll wish you'd done things differently. I already wish that I said, but not for the reasons you think. He left tires screeching, anger trailing behind like exhaust. The next morning, my phone buzzed again, this time with an alert from my bank. Unauthorized attempt to reset password. I felt my stomach twist. Then another message followed, multiple failed login attempts detected. I called the bank immediately. Block all access except mine, I said. The representative confirmed. We'll secure everything and flag the address. You did the right thing. When I hung up, I realized my hands were shaking, not from fear, but adrenaline. They weren't just trying to guilt me anymore. They were trying to erase me financially to take back what they believed was owed. I sat down at my kitchen table surrounded by papers and receipts and opened my documentation folder. Every action they took now was evidence. Every threat, every attempt, every lie. I was done reacting. From this point forward, everything went on record. Later that night, Drew stopped by with 2 cups of cocoa and a half smile. You look like you're drafting a war plan. I am, I said. They've declared it. I'm just answering. She sat across from me. You know you could have disappeared, changed numbers, moved states, but you're still here facing it. Why, I looked down at the stack of files at my name printed on every legal document because for once I said the story will have my version in ink, not theirs. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, but inside, the room was warm. I felt the kind of calm that only comes after you stop asking for fairness and start building your own justice. The court hearing was set for early December. It wasn't a trial, just a property claim review, but to my parents, it was a public spectacle. I arrived early, sitting alone in the hallway outside the courtroom, my folder of evidence clutched in both hands. The marble floors reflected the fluorescent lights above, sterile and cold. I stared at my reflection in them, a woman composed but worn, the kind of tired that comes from years of holding things together that were never hers to fix. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and saw them waiting across the aisle. Dad in his old gray suit that didn't quite fit anymore. Mom in pearls, her expression soft but carefully rehearsed. Ethan sat behind them, his arms crossed, eyes full of something between anger and shame. I took a seat at the opposite table next to Mara, who leaned in and whispered, "Stay calm. Facts win, not emotions." The judge entered, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a voice that filled the room without raising. "We're here to discuss the ownership and financial transfers related to the Monroe family property. Ms. Rachel Monroe, you're claiming full ownership of the lake house purchased under your name." "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I have documentation showing every payment came from my personal account." Dad shifted his jaw tight. "That property was a family investment," he said, voice raised. "She's trying to steal from us." The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Monroe, you'll have your turn to speak." Mara stood and presented the binder of receipts, bank transfers, and mortgage statements. Every dollar came from Ms. Monroe's income, she said calmly. Additionally, the defendant, Mr. Monroe, opened an unauthorized account using funds transferred by my client for household expenses. Those funds were later redirected to a personal account, and a large portion was used to make a down payment on a recreational boat. The judge's brows lifted slightly. A boat. Mom's voice cracked. We didn't mean any harm. It was supposed to be a surprise for the family, a thank you gift. Mara's expression didn't flicker. Then why was it registered solely under your husband's name? Silence, the kind that eats up oxygen. Ethan stood abruptly, his voice loud. You're ruining everything, Rachel. Over a few $1,000s. You're destroying your parents for pride. I turned in my seat, met his eyes, and said quietly, You think this is about money? The room seemed to shrink around us. It's about being treated like a human being instead of a bank. It's about accountability. The judge cleared her throat. That's enough. I've seen enough documentation to issue a ruling. She paused, flipping through the paperwork. Based on the evidence, the property belongs solely to Ms. Monroe. Furthermore, the court recommends an investigation into the financial misappropriation of the funds provided by the plaintiff. Dad's face drained of color. You can't do this, he said, his voice breaking. I'm her father. The judge looked up, her tone neutral but firm. Parenthood isn't a legal defense for theft, Mr. Monroe. Mom let out a soft sob, but it sounded rehearsed hollow. Ethan looked away, his hands fisted at his sides. When the gavel fell, the sound echoed like thunder through the quiet courtroom. It wasn't triumph, I felt. It was something heavier, quieter. Closure never comes clean. It always leaves a residue. Outside, the cold air bit my cheeks as I stepped onto the courthouse steps. Reporters weren't there. This wasn't news to anyone but us, but it felt like the whole world should have paused to watch. Mara touched my arm gently. You did the right thing, she said. Right doesn't always feel good, I murmured. She smiled faintly. No, but it's still right. As I walked toward my car, I saw Ethan standing by the parking meter waiting. His face was pale, his eyes red. You really went through with it, he said quietly. I did. He shook his head. They're devastated. You'll never hear from them again. I unlocked my car door and looked at him over the roof. Then maybe that's peace for all of us. He didn't respond. He just watched as I drove away. The snow had started again, small flakes spinning in the air, covering everything equally like forgiveness that didn't ask for permission, only distance. It's been 6 months since that morning in court. The snow that once blanketed everything in silence has long melted, replaced by soft spring rain tapping against my apartment windows. The world outside looks clean new, like the kind of quiet that follows a storm that finally ran out of anger. The lake house is officially mine now. I drive there on weekends, not because I need to, but because it reminds me what peace looks like when it's paid for in truth instead of guilt. I've repainted the porch a muted blue, replaced the curtains, and filled the empty rooms with secondhand furniture and soft music. Every corner carries something my parents would have hated: imperfection, individuality, freedom. I still hear from Ethan sometimes. His texts arrive sporadically, usually late at night, as if he's riding through the fog of regret. Mom and Dad lost the house, one message read. They're living with Aunt Valerie now. Dad's been sick. Mom keeps asking if you'll forgive her. I never replied, not out of cruelty, but clarity. Forgiveness doesn't mean reopening old doors. It means accepting that some people will always knock on them with the same hands that once took everything. One Sunday afternoon, I sat by the lake with a cup of coffee, my phone buzzing with a new voicemail. It was Mom's voice, thin, fragile, and decades older than I remembered. Rachel, she began, I don't expect you to answer. I just wanted you to know. We lost the boat. The bank repossessed it after your father stopped making payments. He's angry at everyone, especially himself. I can't fix it anymore. Maybe I never could. There was a pause, the sound of her breathing unsteady. I just hope you're happy, dear. Truly happy. The line went silent. For a long time, I just stared at the water, watching how the wind scattered the reflection of the trees into ripples. Happiness. The word felt both simple and foreign. I wasn't sure I believed in it yet, but I believed in something steadier. Self-respect, stability, peace. Drew and I still talk every evening. She teases me about becoming a domestic hermit, says I should host a Thanksgiving dinner this year, a real one. You could reclaim it, she said last night. Turn it into your holiday instead of theirs. The idea stuck. So this November I did. I set the table for four, and me drew her fiancé and little Lily, who I'd promised to invite months ago after seeing her and Ethan briefly at the courthouse. She's 12 now, tall, quiet, with her mother's eyes and a politeness that feels too careful for her age. When she arrived, she handed me a small wrapped box. "Mom said I should thank you," she whispered. Inside was a keychain with a tiny silver boat charm. I smiled despite myself. "Does your mom know about this?" I asked. She shook her head. "It's from me." Dinner was small, imperfect, full of laughter that didn't echo off resentment. When the pie came out, Drew raised her glass. "To freedom, to boundaries, and to family, the kind you choose." I didn't realize I was crying until Lily reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You okay?" she asked. "I think so," I said softly. "I think I finally am." After they left, I stood by the window looking out over the lake as the first snowflakes of the season began to fall. The air smelled like wood smoke and cinnamon, just like that night a year ago when everything began. Only now, the silence wasn't heavy, it was whole. My phone lit up one last time before midnight. A text from Ethan. "Dad's in the hospital. Mom asked if I could tell you. She says she's sorry." I stared at it for a long while, then typed back, "Tell her I wish them peace." Nothing more, nothing less. As I set the phone down, I caught my reflection in the window, older, steadier, unrecognizable in the best way. The woman who once mistook servitude for love had disappeared somewhere between the evidence folders and the courtroom steps. What remained was someone who had learned that freedom doesn't come from running, it comes from standing still long enough to let the truth settle. Outside, the snow thickened, covering the path that led down to the water. I opened the window just enough to feel the cold brush my skin and whispered not to them but to myself, I don't owe anyone anymore. And for the first time, it didn't sound like defiance. It sounded like peace.